If you will, go ahead and take your Bibles tonight and turn to Proverbs chapter 12. And we're going to be focusing our attention at verse number 14 in just a few moments. Proverbs chapter 12, and we're going to begin our study at verse number 14. I am so grateful to be here with you tonight. I thoroughly enjoyed being here with you last year, being a part of your summer series, and have looked forward to being back with you once again with the invitation that was extended just a few months ago. So thankful that you're still able to have your series at this time with various things that are going on. But it is so good to be back in Warren County. The only problem is this is such a brief trip. I came in yesterday afternoon, and then I'm going to be leaving right after the service tonight. And so very, very quick, very much a whirlwind, but so grateful to get to come back and to be in Warren County and to see a few familiar faces throughout the day today, and then also this evening. Appreciate so very much Chris and Danielle, the great work that they have done in this county for so many years. And I know that you are thankful that you get to call them yours, and you're thankful that Morrison is their home and for the good work that they continue to do here as well. If you heard him, he said that he loved Blair. He mentioned that first, loved Blair and the kids, and I was wondering, well, what about me? But he covered himself right there at the end and said that we love him dearly, and he knows that feeling is mutual, that he is one of those friends that sticks closer than a brother. And if you have a friend like that, you know just how valuable those people really are and how much they mean to you. This summer you are studying about a word or a set of words and phrases that will revolve around the subject, the idea of fruit. Last week, Roger talked about the vine and the branches. Over the next several weeks, you're going to be looking at things like the fruit of repentance. You're going to be talking about fruit from the tree of life. You're going to be studying about things like the phrase that Jesus used, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." And all of this study is designed to coincide with your overall study that you're having for the year of the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5:22 and 23. Well, tonight we're going to pay special attention to something that Solomon writes about. We're going to be spending a lot of time throughout the book of Proverbs. But as we get started with our study this evening, I want to invite your attention there to Proverbs chapter 12, and there's going to be a few passages that we're going to use as we begin our study this evening. You'll remember that the book of Proverbs is a book of wise collections, a book of wise sayings. And those wise sayings are designed to be a benefit for your life and my life as well. In Proverbs 12 and verse number 14, Solomon, he writes these words. He says, "A man shall be satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth, and the recompense of a man's hand shall be rendered unto him." Now, if you will, go to the very next chapter and look at Proverbs 13 and verse number 2. He says, "A man shall eat good." Now watch this next phrase and see if it sounds familiar with Proverbs 12. "By the fruit of his mouth, but the soul of the transgressors shall eat violence." In both of these passages, Solomon talks about that subject of fruit, doesn't he? And when he speaks about it, he talks about the fruit of our mouth. Sometimes we may describe it as the fruit of our lips. For the next few moments this evening, we're going to be talking about the subject of fruit and how it relates to the fruit of our mouth. But there are 3 D's that we're going to talk about in relation to our study. Here's the first one. We're going to notice fruit defined. Well, what is meant when we see this word fruit in the Scriptures? And in particular, what is meant here in Proverbs 12 and also Proverbs 13. Well, we're talking about a product, and really more specifically, a product that is being produced. You remember when Jesus spoke those parables? We have recorded for us there in Matthew 13, Luke 8, I believe Mark chapter 8. And when you think about those parables that Jesus spoke, one of the most familiar ones is the parable of what? The parable of the soils. And as Jesus talks about those soils, He's making reference to the human heart. And the very last soil that He talked about was one that produced what? Produced fruit. And so there's the idea, that there's the product. Now when we think about this in relation to some of the other subjects you'll be studying about, for example, the fruits of repentance. You remember that phrase is used in the book of Matthew and also in the book of Acts. Well, what is being talked about there? He's talking about the product of somebody who has made some changes in their life. Immediately when I think about somebody who made some changes, my mind goes to Zacchaeus. You remember there in Luke chapter 19? He has an encounter with Jesus, and once he has that encounter with Jesus, this man makes some changes in his life. What kind of job did Zacchaeus have? He was a publican, wasn't he? Did people really like publicans? They didn't like them, did they? Those were people that were very, very despised in the first century. Because not only were they tax collectors, they liked to go above and beyond, and they would pocket a lot of that money themselves. Well, once he has this encounter with Jesus, what does he do? He goes and returns that money and gives it back fourfold. He goes above and beyond. Those are those fruits of repentance. You think about the brethren at Thessalonica in 1 Thessalonians 1, verses 9 through 11. They turned from idols to serve the living God. But what about the fruit of sin? Did you know that you can't find fruit being specifically tied to sin, but when you look at Romans 6 and verse number 23, Paul tells us that the wages of sin is what? Is death. The product of sin. This is what it produces. It's going to produce death. Now let's bring that and tie that back with our overall subject that we're looking at tonight. The fruit of our mouth. What kind of fruit are we producing with the words that we use on a daily basis? Are we producing a product that is toxic? Are we producing a product that is dangerous? Or are we producing a product that's designed to be beneficial to someone else? You see, when we think about our words, you ever thought to yourself, or maybe you said to somebody else, you're going to eat your words? Or your words are going to come back to haunt you? Those of you that are grandparents, when you were raising your children, did you ever say that to your kids? Those words that you're telling us, they're going to come back to haunt you one day? And now that your children are raising your grandchildren, that they're saying some of the very same things that you told them when you were raising them. I can't tell you how many times growing up I thought to myself, I am never going to say those things to my kids. I am never going to do those things. Guess what I'm doing now? I'm doing those exact same things. I'm saying those exact same things. I'm eating some of those words. You've heard the statement, you'll reap what you sow. Sometimes we reap what we sow on the fruit that comes from our lips, the fruit that comes from our mouth. I am so thankful that God gives us a choice. And He gives us a choice in how we use our words. Now let's look at another passage that Solomon is going to tie into this idea of the fruit of the mouth. And let's look at Proverbs chapter 18 and verse number 21. Solomon tells us that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Now look at this last part. And they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Did you see that last part? But did you also see the first part? Now I want to play on these words for just a moment. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. What a powerful thought. To know that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Did you know that wars have been started based on words? There have been people that have gotten fistfights because somebody said the magic word. There have been relationships that have been started and relationships that have been destroyed just simply over words that have been spoken. Many of us remember that old George Strait song, check yes or no. There's a lot of power in those two words, isn't it? And so when we think about the power that Solomon is talking about here, he's letting us know that the product that we are producing can have some great benefits to it, or it can have some great consequences to it as well. Let's move into our second thought tonight, and that is this. Let's talk about fruit that is dangerous. Fruit that is dangerous. We've looked at fruit defined, and we've talked about that it's a product, but let's talk about fruit that is dangerous. Well, when I was studying for this lesson tonight, I put in a Google search bar, just put in something simple, and it was, what are the most dangerous fruits that somebody could eat? Do you know that some of them are very dangerous to us? And instead of producing a top 10 list, there was one that produced a top 11 list. I don't know why the number of 11 and why not just 10, but they produced a top 11 list. And guess which one was very close to the top? This thing called an elderberry. Raise your hand if you have taken some elderberry syrup, maybe a gummy, maybe you've had it in a tablet form because you were trying to shorten or prevent the flu. Show of hands tonight. All right, several hands have gone up. I didn't know till I started doing this study that some forms of elderberry are extremely dangerous to us. But when you start thinking about the stem and the branches that they grow on, and even those berries, those seeds contain something called cyanide. All right? Now, cyanide can do some very bad things to us. It can cause some serious abdominal issues. It can cause a person to go into a coma. It can even lead to death. However, if you cook and prepare an elderberry properly, you cook out those toxins. And therefore, you're able to have those tablets. You're able to drink that syrup. I personally like the taste of the syrup. My kids and my wife, they can't stand it. They think it tastes like medicine. I would just turn it up and drink it like I would orange juice or something like that. But you make it in jams and jellies. You make it also in pies. I haven't had an elderberry pie before. Somebody in here possibly has cooked one of those. Let me give you a second one that's very dangerous that was on that list. Something called a macanil. You ever heard of that before? A macanil? Anybody? All right. It actually grows on the Florida coastline and all throughout the Caribbean. Its nickname is the little apple of death because they look like little crab apples. And from what I read about this particular fruit, it can really mess you up. The sap that comes from the tree, if it gets on your skin in any way, it's going to leave a chemical burn on you. Number two, if you were to burn the branches, the ash that begins to spread through the air can cause a person to go blind. If you eat this, it can cause massive irreversible damage to your digestive tract, and it could be so severe that it could kill you. You want nothing to do with this whatsoever. Now you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with our study tonight? I think you and I would agree that there are some fruits that are very, very dangerous just based upon those two. When it comes to the fruit of our lips, the way that we use it, the product that's being used, it can be very dangerous in our relationships with others, and it can be very dangerous in our relationship with God. Sometimes the way that we use our mouth can be dangerous to our souls. And so tonight, for the next few moments, we want to look at 4 ways that we can use the product, this product that's being produced from our mouth, in dangerous ways. Here's the first way tonight, and that is vain words, using vain words. There are a number of people that when they get excited, that when they get startled, when they hear good news, or maybe when they receive some bad news, what do they say? Oh my, and then you fill in the blank, put God's name there. There are some people that will scream out, Jesus Christ. There are some people that even like to use the phrase, oh Lord. Let me give you one that kind of hits even closer today. There are some that like to even use these sayings in text messages, and they will shorten it by using, I wish our teenagers were in here, because they'll use it in this way, OMG. OMG. Oh my, fill in the blank, God. And there have been some that I've tried to talk with before about this, and you know what their immediate answer is? Oh, I didn't say the word. I didn't say those words. Let me ask you this. What do you mean when you type in the letters TY? Thank you. TTYL? Talk to you later? Yesterday, we had one of our members, one of our moms, sent me a text message about her son. He had to go get tested for COVID. She texted me and she said the test came back negative. I told her, that's great. Thanks for giving me an update. You know what she replied back with? YW. What does that mean? You're welcome. When a young person or even somebody that's older that says, that's not what I meant, don't give me that. Don't give me that that's not what you meant, because the person that receives that text, that's what they are interpreting from that text message, just like with TY with thank you. So what do? We need to choose some other words instead of that. So what's wrong with saying these vain words? Why should we not use phrases like oh my and you fill in the blank? Because number one, it's wrong. Remember when you go back to Exodus chapter 20 and verse number 7? There, the children of Israel, and this is in the context of what we generally call the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Now someone may say, well, you know, Robert, that's the Old Testament. That was written for those individuals long ago under the Old Covenant. Do we really think things have changed? Under the New Covenant, now I have permission to use the Lord's name in vain? Absolutely not. Remember in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus there in the section of the Sermon on the Mount, right there in the midst of it, that section that a lot of times we like to call the Lord's Prayer, Jesus said, Our Father who art in heaven. What's that next word? Hallowed. What's that word mean? Set apart, special. What was Jesus saying? Our Father who art in heaven, special and set apart is your name. It's a name like no other. You see, God's name is holy. God's name is different. And when we start putting it down on a common level, we start to defame that name. And as a child of God, we have no business using words like that. Even though something may be commonplace in society, we need to consider the words that are coming out of our mouth as a child of God. Number two, second type of word that's dangerous, cuss words. Cuss words. These words are everywhere, aren't they? You turn on the TV, we hear those four-letter words, don't we? You try to watch a movie and they've always got to put those four-letter words in there. Our young people, when they walk down the hallway at school, I was teaching a teenage class at South Haven one day, and I said, do y'all hear some pretty colorful words when you walk down the hallway? And several of them just rolled their eyes. You wouldn't imagine, Mr. Robert. I said, Can you remember a day when you didn't walk down the hallway and you didn't hear a word? Not a single one of them could raise their hand. They hear it every single day at school. Those of us who are older, we go to work, you go to the office, you go to the factory. Those words are commonplace, aren't they? You go to the ball fields. Everybody's talking like that. But you know who should never be talking like that? Those of us who are Christians, because we're trying to let our light shine. Hold your finger there at the book of Proverbs, and let's go over to the book of Colossians for just a moment. Colossians chapter 3, and you may recall that when you get over here to Colossians chapter 3, that you start at verse number 1, and Paul says, if, some translations will use the word since, you've then been risen with Christ. What's he talking about there, being risen? These are people who had just obeyed the gospel. These are people who are New Testament Christians. You go back to Colossians 2, verse number 12. They had just been baptized. So now, since you've been raised, what are you going to do? You're going to seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. When you get down to verse number 5, he's going to give some responsibilities, some things that God's children are going to do. He says, you're going to put to death. You're going to mortify certain things in your life. And then when you get to verse number 8, he says, now I want you to put off some things. Well, what were those things? Anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Now let's tie in a parallel passage here, the book of Ephesians, and let's look at Ephesians 4:29. If you'd like to take notes in your Bible, put Ephesians 4:29 out there beside Colossians 3:8. And remember that if you want the best commentary for the book of Colossians, all you have to do is turn to the book of Ephesians, right? So you look at Ephesians 4:29, and if you go back to verse 22 through 24, he talks about the old man and the new man. Remember, the old man is the one but before he becomes a Christian. The new man is raised to walk in newness of life. The new man, he's going to put some things away. Look at what verse number 29 says. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. That word corrupt there is a word that means rotten and worthless, vile. Since we're talking about fruit tonight, I want you to imagine with me that we go to the grocery store. Let's say we go over to the produce section. We go into the produce section and we're gonna pick out our own apples that are there. And we get over there to that section and we start to look through them, and we pick up one and we really examine it and look it all over. And then we find this brown spot on it. It's pretty soft to the touch. Then you start to see this pus-looking stuff start to come out of it. And when you examine it a little bit more, it's got a little bit of a stench to it. There's some fuzz that's growing all over it. And as you're looking at that, your mouth is watering and you think, I can't wait to take a big bite out of that apple. I can't think of a single person that thinks like that. What do we do with something like that? We put it back in, right? When God hears those four-letter words, those cuss words, that's what he thinks. Something that's worthless, something that's rotten. That's the word picture that is there. Now, how do we know if a word is right or wrong? Someone may say, show me in Genesis to Revelation, somewhere in the Word of God, where this word, this four-letter word, show me exactly where it is wrong. Did you know that God doesn't have a list? God doesn't give a list of thou shalt not say this word, thou shalt not say that word. Imagine what that list would be like. Those of you that, let's just put a decade on it. Those of you that lived in the 1940s, 1950s, would you say that there were some words that you used then, that if you used those words the same way today, that they mean something completely different? All right? I see some of you shaking your heads. You see, words change over time, don't they? They don't have the same meaning. And so imagine trying to produce a book. Now, in the 1940s, you can't use this word. The 1950s, you can't use this word. But over here in the 2000s, now you can use this one. Imagine how large that book would be every time that words change. But then imagine this. Imagine having to do that in every language. Did you know that there are some words that we can use in the English language that are completely appropriate, but in other languages they won't use because they find them inappropriate? They find those words as words that sometimes may be fighting words. So how do we know? How do we know if a word is right or wrong? Society dictates it. Well, somebody may say, well, you know, Robert, society is starting to say, well, you can use this word on TV, so it must be appropriate. Then we have to start thinking about, what does the word mean? How is it being used? And if those words are being used in inappropriate ways, if those words are going to lead a person astray by listening to them, then we best not be using those words. We need to find another word to use because we're to be an example in our words. Number 3, deceitful words. Deceitful words are dangerous. You ever met someone that you just didn't know if they were telling you the truth or not? And the reason for that is because they have told you so many lies in the past that you don't know if they're lying to you or if they are telling you the truth. Several years ago, the University of Massachusetts did a study on this very subject, and this was the revealings of their findings. They said that the average American lies 25 times a day. By the age of 4, 90% of children have grasped the concept of lying, and it only gets worse from there. 60% of adults cannot hold a 10-minute conversation without telling at least one lie. Okay? That's the average American. There's another book that was put out a few years back, and it was entitled The Day America Told the Truth. And these were the findings that they came up with. On a regular basis, 86% of young people lied to their parents. 75% lie to friends. 73% lie to siblings. And 69% lie to their spouses on a regular basis. People lie to their employers. They lie to the government. People lie to the court systems. People lie to insurance companies. When my mother was in her mid-50s, she was at work one day and all of a sudden got hurt on the job. My mom was one that always did a lot of manual labor, and she was always one that whenever she did her job, she was very high energy, wanted to see how fast she could get it done, that type of thing, very efficient with what she did. And when she was in her 50s, she worked for a company that did resets at grocery stores. She was the individual that would move the peanut butter when the peanut butter's been on aisle 3 for the last 10 years, and the next time you go in the store, it's now on aisle 5. It's not in the same place anymore. She's that person that you would get aggravated with because there was a company that would pay her and say, okay, at Kroger, we need to move it to this area. At Walmart, we've got to move it to that area. On a regular basis, she would pick up 50-pound boxes. And this one day, she decided, just like any other day, she'd pick up a 50-pound box, and her back said, not anymore. She had to collect workman's comp. After the few weeks of workman's comp, she tried to go back to work, couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't do that type of work. She didn't have any other really type of skill set to work in an office or anything like that. This was the only thing that she knew. What was she going to do? She tried to file for Social Security disability. Well, there were several hoops that she had to jump through with that. She hired an attorney. The attorney she hired is an elder at the Forest Hill Church in Memphis, where the Memphis School of Preaching is. He said, okay, the first thing we've got to get you to do is go to the doctor. Appointment was set up. She went to the doctor. X-ray was done. The doctor walked in, and this was the first thing that he said to her. you really are in pain. And he said, most people that come through my office, they want a free ride. You know what that told me? That man hears a lot of lies on a daily basis. People deceive people. But why do people tell lies? A lot of times it's the number one reason is to avoid punishment. Sometimes it's to cover shame. You remember Potiphar's wife and the shame that she tried to cover. She was the one that seduced Joseph, but when her husband got home that day, what did she tell him? No, it was him. He's the one that did this. Some people lie to make themselves look better. You remember Ananias and Sapphira? They probably did that because they wanted the same praise that Barnabas got right on the heels of Acts chapter 4. Some people do it because it's a habit. Some people do it to be polite. You ever had a dear sweet sister make you a casserole before? They bring it by the house. You take a bite. That was the only bite that you took. Anytime that ever happened, anytime? And then when that dear sweet sister comes by a couple of days later to pick up that dish and to check on you, how was that? Oh, it was wonderful. And people do that out of a habit to be polite. But what have you just done? You've just told a lie. When we were in preaching school, Brother Cates was mine and Chris's director. Brother Cates, especially when he'd kind of get off subject a little bit and he'd start talking about practical things, he'd sit in there and he'd clip his fingernails some days. He'd pull up his socks to his knees. He would sit back and lean back in his chair and put his feet up and he'd cross them. And sometimes he'd say, now, brethren, and he had a really odd way of saying it. But there was one day that he said, there's going to be some sweet ladies that are going to bring you a casserole. And this needs to be your answer, whether it's good or whether it's bad, because it's generic. And that way you're not going to come back, your words aren't going to come back to haunt you. When they bring you that casserole, whether it's good or bad, and they come back and ask you, how was it? You tell them it was one of a kind. And that way, if it was terrible, it's one of a kind. If it's great, it's one of a kind. But at least it's generic, and at least you haven't told a story in the process. But why is lying so bad? You know, if we were to put a scale on sin, 1 being the least, 10 being the worst, where would we put lying? Probably at a 1 or 2, right? Where does God put it? If you look at Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 18, these 6 things that the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination to Him. 2 on that list have to deal with lying. You look at God's meter, it's a 10 off the charts. That's how repulsed He is by it. Why is it so bad? Because there's some eternal consequences that go with it. Revelation 21, verse number 8. But number 4, very quickly, because our time's running out, they're gossiping words. How many of us have ever had a friendship destroyed because we couldn't keep our mouth shut? We couldn't hold that information. We just had to go tell it. And the person that we told it to, they decided to tell it to this person. They told it to that person. And by the time the end of the week comes, the rest of the county knows about it. Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 11 for just a moment. Proverbs chapter 11. Solomon's got a lot of things to say about the subject of gossip. In the King James, you won't read this word, but there will be some other words that will be synonyms to it. He says, Proverbs 11:13, a talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. Does that sound like a gossiper, a talebearer? You look at Proverbs 16:28, a froward man soweth strife, and a whisperer separateth chief friends. Sounds like Solomon knew about the effects of gossip, didn't he? You remember in Proverbs 26 and verse number 20, he said, where you don't have any wood, the fire goes out. You take away the talebearer, the strife is going to end. What a wise saying. The story is told about 2 men who lived several centuries ago in a small village in Europe. They grew up together. They were best friends. One of those friends became a leader one day. Well, the other friend resented him, started to gossip about him, started to spread rumors. Before you know it, the friendship was destroyed. Finally, the conscience got to the best of the one that had spoken that gossip. He went to his buddy. He said, I am so sorry. What can I do to make this right? His buddy told him, he said, I need you to go get a pillow. And I need you to take that feather pillow and I want you to go up to the highest part of the hillside and I want you to rip it open and I want you to shake all of those feathers everywhere. He came back down and he said, I did exactly as you asked. Are we good now? And he said, now I need you to go do this. I need you to go back up to that hillside and pick up every feather. He said, that's impossible. There's no way that I could do that. And he said, that's the effects of gossip. That's just how dangerous that product from our mouth is. So let's be careful with the things that we say. Let's conceal those matters. But number three, let's talk about some fruit that's designed to be beneficial in the last few minutes that we've got tonight. I love to eat apples. You know, they say an apple a day keeps the doctor away, full of vitamin C, full of fiber, full of water. I love to eat raspberries. These are full of antioxidants. We could talk about oranges. We could talk about bananas. We could talk about grapes. But for the sake of our time tonight, most of us realize just how beneficial fruit is for our bodies. What about the product that comes from our mouth? I'm going to give you very quickly four fruits, four pieces of product, four types of fruit that are very, very beneficial in the time that we have left. Number one, words that evangelize. Words that evangelize. Remember Solomon said, he that winneth souls is wise. Proverbs 11 and verse number 30. Acts 11 and verse number 14, who shall tell thee words whereby thou and all thy household shall be saved. But we got a lot of bad news going on in our world right now, don't we? You hear on the news every day the numbers about COVID-19. You hear a lot of things about crime. There's a lot of things being said about racism. And the news is just terrible. Why not give some people some good news? We've got the greatest news of all. But it's up to us to follow that command, Matthew 28, verse number 19. It's up to us to show others that we love them, Matthew 22, verse number 39. Number two, let's use words that encourage. You see, that fruit can be beneficial because we encourage people. I can't think of a single person that wants to be discouraged. But I can think of mostly everybody that wants to be encouraged, don't you? A kind word can go such a long, long way. There in Ephesians 4 and verse number 29, he said, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying. That which is good to the use of edifying. I mentioned a moment ago that our teenagers weren't in here. I'm sorry. I see a lot of you in here tonight. Chris told me earlier that y'all were going to be in a different class, but I see you guys in here and I appreciate y'all listening tonight to what we're talking about. Those encouraging words can go a long way. Number three, words that evaluate. Sometimes we just need to bite our tongue, would you agree? Sometimes it's better that we don't say anything. There are times that I have to tell my children, you need to take your chill pills. You need to relax. We need to think about what we say, how we say it, when we say it. You ever heard somebody say it's not what you said but how you said it? Or it's not what you said but it's when you said it. Solomon said a word that is fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver, Proverbs 25 verse number 11. James tells us that we're to be swift to hear and slow to speak. There's a reason why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. You ever notice this groove that's in your top lip? You ever notice what your finger can do with it? Can sit right there in it, and sometimes we need to do that. Sometimes we just need to zip it. There are times that if we're not careful, we'll open our mouth and we'll insert what? We'll insert our foot. There's a number of occasions that as preachers, elders, we get called to those hospital rooms. We get called to those funeral homes. Members, you go to the funeral home. What is our natural tendency to want to do and say to those family members? Our natural tendency is to find the magic words that takes all that pain away, right? There are no magic words. sometimes the best thing we can do is just be there for them and be quiet. There's no words that need to be spoken. Just be a shoulder to cry on. Just be present. I'll give you a fourth one. And this is what we're going to close with. Let's use words that educate. Words to educate. In Proverbs chapter 15 and verse number 7, Solomon says, "The lips of the wise disperse knowledge, but the heart of the foolish doeth not so." We all want our families to be educated, don't we? We want them to be well educated. But let's not neglect the greatest education of all, and that's their spiritual education. Let's make sure that we are educating them about life's greatest questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? Let's educate them about the God of heaven that created it all. Let's educate them about why Jesus came to this earth. Let's talk to them about sin. Let's talk to them about salvation. Let's talk to them about the wonderful place called heaven. Let's be real with them about the place called hell. Jesus was real with people. Let's talk about salvation, practical matters, right and wrong, how to treat others. But let's make sure that we are educating them spiritually. And let's really seriously think about the product that's coming from the fruit of our lips. Tonight, I thank you so much for your kind attention. I hope that our study has been beneficial as we've talked about defining what fruit is, as we've talked about fruit that is dangerous, and then also fruit that is designed to be beneficial. Thank you so much.